Welcome into another episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik, Skopil, Jackson Moore here on a Saturday night. Oregon 56-10 victory over Rutgers answered the bell. Certainly, any concerns about a hangover? The team didn't look very hungover, did it, Jackson? Looked pretty ready to put things together and turned in, I would say, one of the more impressive performances of the season from both sides of the ball. Certainly, some things to nitpick if we want to, but certainly a lot of things to be really excited about, I think, too, if you're coming from the Oregon side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. When I got to join on this beat, this was the kind of performances I had recalled seeing over the last 15 years or so. So it was cool to be able to cover this one and see how it played out. And not too surprised by what I saw, but I want to get your take. Just what was your initial reaction from just what you saw beyond just the final score?
I think the thing that was really impressive to me was I'll start with Dante Moore as just somebody that I was curious to see kind of where he'd be at. And I think we learned what we saw last week was largely Indiana related, not Dante Moore related. That doesn't mean future teams can't throw a lot of the things at Oregon that Indiana did. Certainly, we saw Indiana try to be a little bit more creative defensively with some of like the simulated pressures and exotic stuff they tried to do. It just didn't work. And at a certain point, I think they kind of had to abandon that effort and just kind of went back to their base principles, which also didn't work. As we know, this is like a record breaking day. But just for Dante to kind of have that response, that answer, like I'd say this is probably the best performance we've seen from him. 15 of 20, 290, 4 touchdowns a pick. Those are pretty unimpeachable numbers. Was in command of the offense throughout. I mean, it's a game where they come like 27 yards from setting the school record in total yardage. And I know Jackson's got some data on some of that we can get into in a bit here, but it's also a day that starts with like a turnover on the first drive. They have 2 turnovers in the second half that kind of stop it from like they didn't play exactly perfectly, and yet you look up and the totality of this offensive showing was extremely, extremely impressive. And we have to hit the defense too, because if not for those turnovers, they may have pitched a shutout. Rutgers didn't get over 200 yards until their final drive of the game, and Oregon again finished with 750. I was trying to see if we could find this anywhere over on the Go Ducks website, over kind of in the record books, Jackson, but I have to imagine this is like the largest net yardage advantage Oregon's ever had. Like it's almost a 550 yard advantage over the opposition. And there's so many other kind of little barometers to point to, but super impressive. Like really very little to be concerned about coming out of this one. I did ask people on social media for some kind of thoughts on that, and we'll certainly get to that later. And kind of the two of us can kind of pick apart whether or not they think those are legitimate or not, or kind of where our brain's at with that. But I don't know. For me, coming out of the Indiana game, I picked Oregon to win, I think 45-21, so 24 points. This game was never going to be that competitive. This game was about as lopsided as you'll see in a conference game, and especially on the road against a team that, as I talked about all week, Rutgers was 0-3 in conference play, but had been either ahead at half or tied at half, and it was in the game in the fourth quarter, and 2 of the 3 losses to teams that coming into today at least had a combined 3 losses. Like this was a Rutgers team that I thought was like kind of sneaky good. Certainly don't know if I feel that way anymore. Maybe I just feel like Oregon's is more than sneaky good, but is a little bit better than any of us maybe even envisioned, or at least against a caliber of opponent like this.
Yeah, it felt like between Rutgers' competitiveness and the risk of a hangover game, that this one could potentially get scary if the Ducks came out flat and Rutgers played a lot better than what they ended up showing today. I think maybe the response to the Indiana game might be the biggest overarching story here. Just your take on this team being able to bounce back from what happened last week and really turn it around in 7 days.
Well, I thought it was notable on Wednesday that Coach Lanning was a little bit testy when asked about some Indiana-centric stuff. He said, "Hey, that game was played a couple of days ago. Like we're looking ahead, and it's pretty clear whatever." This would be a fun case of watching that Ducks versus them video this week to kind of see what buttons were pushed, because I don't think there's any question this team not only turned a corner but like hit it running. It just did not feel like a team that was really impacted by that at all in a negative way. If anything, it felt like this was something that provided some momentum, put something behind them, put something at their backs, because It's funny with teams because we've been doing this long enough, Jackson, to that we do know like full well that even though it's one loss in October, seasons get derailed that way. Like I think it's notable, and I'm sure there are more contributing factors than this, but like Penn State, Oklahoma State, Oregon State all fired their head coaches shortly after losing to Oregon. None of those teams have won a game. Penn State came actually pretty close against Iowa today on the road. And it pretty impressed that they were in that game leading in the fourth quarter. But this could have been that Indiana game could have been a game that kind of gets this season kind of on the wrong end and kind of turns things over. And instead, here we are talking about a game where they just did whatever they wanted for 4 quarters. They did so many things better in areas that were of concern. Like I mentioned it. And again, it's not apples to apples because you can't really say because I saw a couple people point this out, like, well, where was this last week against Indiana? Well, the reality is Indiana had a lot to do with that result too. But the areas that were concerns last week, protecting Dante Moore, being a little more creative on offense, getting off the field on third down, forcing some turnovers, those are areas where they really excelled in this game. And in ways that I think are extremely encouraging for the rest of the season, and again, it's a sport that we're very reactionary. There are a lot of these, but it feels like maybe a pivot point, especially on a night where, I don't know, Jackson, if you saw the final score, USC Notre Dame, because I haven't quite seen that one yet. Did Notre Dame hold on for that one?
They did. 34-24, I believe it was.
Basically, all the teams remaining on Oregon's schedule, aside from Minnesota, and I mentioned Iowa snuck by Penn State, dropped games this weekend. Wisconsin gets shut out. Michigan dominates Washington in the second half. USC was competitive for the parts I watched against Notre Dame, but I saw Notre Dame with the kickoff return for a touchdown and interception leading to some points, and they kind of took control against USC. So we talked about, people were concerned, is this a 2 or 3 loss team? Could this kind of snowball? I think you come out of today and with what happened with Oregon and around the country feeling like one loss feels very, very attainable. And shoot, it kind of feels like if it doesn't go that way, something kind of wild and wacky happened, because this looked like a team that is capable of beating just about anybody in the country, and certainly every team remaining on its schedule.
Now, the first handful of snaps went the way Rutgers would want it to go for it to be the perfect recipe, and the crowd was into it. I'm curious if you saw anything that caught your eye before Whittington's 68-yard touchdown run that said that Oregon was going to be fine tonight.
The response on defense was like, wasn't that kind of exactly what you wanted to see? It was kind of the first 3 plays from scrimmage were kind of like checking. I had a buddy of mine text me like, oh, they're actually going to lose this game. And it's kind of a joke a little bit, but also like they struggled on second down. They lost 3 yards. They had to throw it on third down. It was the screen pass, which is of course way behind the sticks, which has become a Will Stein special, and something that honestly I'm not always as worried about as some fans. But I see some people who are very critical of that play call, and so of course they go to that. It doesn't work. It ends up being even exacerbated by the fact that he fumbles, and it's just kind of like, oh, here we go again. And yet here comes the defense, and Rutgers goes right to the thing that we talked about all week in the lead up. Just going to throw jump balls to their 6'3", 6'6" receivers on the outside. Ife Obadegwu breaks one up. Brandon Finney's in position on a couple, and they don't gain a single yard on that first drive, have settled for a field goal. I just thought that was very telling that the defense just picked them up, and the offense, of course, then goes on to score touchdowns in 8 of the next 9 drives, and really with zero resistance in this game. But like I felt like that was what you wanted to see after a moment like that. Like this was a game that was about handling adversity, bouncing back from what was a disappointing, kind of concerning loss last week. Certainly deflating, I think is the word I've used. And they kind of even did a little bit in game. Like that was kind of a microcosm of what's happened this week in just a little quick sequence there. And of course, after that, there was no adversity. There was nothing to bounce back from because it just all went their way. A couple of things in the second half we can talk about later that'll pop up, I'm sure, in the nitpick section. But all in all, like that was, I think, super impressive. And really, you go look at the stats. Strong, who I think got hurt at some point in the second half, and KJ Duff, these big receivers, I think they had 4 catches for like 47 yards. Oregon took care of business in a lot of ways in this game, and the way they started there not only set the tone to get the offense involved, but maybe set the tone for like, hey, yeah, you're just not going to have any success here against our defensive backs.
I'm going to pull up some of these offensive stats, but to make sure the defense gets their love, was there anything? I mean, takeaways were big in this one. Anything else structurally from the defense or individually that caught your attention?
Well, here's a cool stat I just had, which is that Oregon had 14 plays of 20 yards or more. I consider those to be explosives. Rutgers had 0, so that stands out. Mentioned it coming in. This was the number 2 pass offense in the conference. I think it was 12th nationally, something like that. 8th in Kaliamankis and the backup, AJ Saras, 8 of 27, 79 yards, 2 interceptions. Like just absolutely nothing going through the air against a team like I said has some serious dudes on the outside. I thought the defense held up in run situations pretty well. I mean, like Rutgers ran it 42 times to get to 123 yards. Nothing there was really explosive. Like I said, their longest gain of the game was a 19-yard run. So, excuse me. I just think the totality of this was really impressive on both sides of the ball. They complemented each other extremely well. And there's so many guys that played in this game. You know, this has been a team that likes to rely on its depth and its numbers. We'd seen that kind of whittled down a little bit. And of course, a bunch of this has to do with the fact this game wasn't competitive, but you know, the defense, even with the backups, came out and got stops. You know, the defense, even without their primary players, went out and did what they needed to do, just like the offense did. So I found that to be pretty encouraging.
Speaking of depth and a lot of players out there, you mentioned those 23 big plays. 14 different Ducks contributed to all those big plays. So there was 7 made catches of 15 or plus more yards. Another 7 had runs of 12 or more yards in this game. Some of the other stats I noted here, not only did the Ducks score 7 consecutive touchdowns, but they did it on 4.6 plays per possession throughout that stretch.
Yeah, right. That stood out too. I was looking at that. Sorry, but just like they like almost all their scoring drives, I think were like two minutes or fewer. It was just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, there was one 10-play drive. I think all the other touchdowns came on between 2 to 4 or 5 plays through this one. Dante Moore, 20 yards per completion almost in this one. Jordan Davison ends up with a very bizarre stat line of 33 yards per carry, considering he only had 3 touches and went for about 100 yards here. I thought was an interesting number was the Ducks had 416 yards just on first downs. And of their 33
Wow.
first downs, 15 accomplished more first downs, 6 more went in the end zone. So they only hit second down on 12 out of the 33 times they had first down snaps in this game.
That's kind of wacky. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, the total margin of yards in this game was 548. And can't help but count 10 road wins as a key stat here in a row now that the Ducks lead the country in that category. So a lot thrown out there. Any of those particularly impress you in this performance, or something else maybe I missed?
Well, the one thing is that they came prior to the kneel downs. This was also a top 10 school record list rushing performance, 415 yards on the ground. That number 10 game was 416 yards. So, you know, on a day where you look up and Dante Moore is stealing the headlines and certainly is going to be a focal point because he plays extremely well. Had the 1 interception, but you know, you take that away, the other 4 incompletions, I think 2 of them were throwaways. And another was one that, you know, was kind of like he was hurried a little bit, just kind of put the ball somewhere where it probably wasn't going to be taken away. Maybe it's a throwaway, maybe it's a little bit inaccurate, but either way, like basically he was on target on every single ball he put out there that he wanted to be on target with the exception of the interception, which was, I think, a great play by the defensive back. But 415 yards rushing is just an eye-popping stat. And frankly, again, Rutgers defensively, I wrote coming into the game here, probably the worst defense in this conference. The stats at least suggested that you have a real strong case. Where they were really weak was the pass defense. And again, maybe they gave up so much in the past that teams just didn't need to run in previous games. And Oregon here builds a lead in the second half. They finish with 415. The second half is when they have 248 of those rush yards. They had 190 rush yards in the third quarter, Jackson. But I just think, and again, Dante deserves to be talked about, and he's going to be written about this weekend. We'll talk about him on podcasts, I'm sure, going forward. But just the fact that, like, Noah Whittington, 11 carries, 125, 2 touchdowns, also had the receiving score. Like, they needed that from him. He's been such a kind of a tone setter in some of their wins this year. It's like the blowout wins they've had. You think about, Montana State, I think the first snap of the season from scrimmage is like a 40-yard run, 35-yard run. Against Oklahoma State, second snap, I know, goes for like a 70-yard touchdown. And it was a little bit later in this game, but the fact that he has that 68-yard score, which is really well blocked, that stands out. You mentioned Jordan Davison, but like D.R. Hill comes out, has his own kind of series where he just takes it right down the field for a touchdown. Good running late from Riggs and Harris, a couple of reserve guys. We should note Jaden Lamar wasn't even available to play in this game, dealing with some kind of injury. I don't think there's been much clarification on that, but I just think the run game here was outstanding a week after it was not relied upon very much. And that kind of leads me to another thing in response to talking about the offense, which is Will Stein. People were very critical of Will and the way he called last week's game, and for good reason. I was critical, certainly in the moment, and after rewatching the game, probably cooled off a bit, but still ultimately felt like of Will Stein's, close to 30 games he's called, probably a little more than that now at Oregon, that was a bottom 3 or 4 showing without question in terms of all the stats. But I also think in terms of like how he game planned and kind of what we saw from him, we saw them find edges with creative scheme. There was that sequence there where they went and did all sorts of wacky stuff, and four straight plays down the field, one of those quick scoring drives where it's like, they line up unbalanced with like a 3 or 4 offensive linemen off to the left side of the formation, and then they run like an off balanced run play to the other side. They had the double reverse flea flicker that they scored. That they got the ball down the field to. I think it was DeCorian Moore or somebody. There was just a couple of sequences there where you're like, okay, like he's opening it up, he's being creative, and they're finding mismatches, and this is what you had become kind of accustomed to seeing from him in the past. So yeah, there's very little here on the offense to be kind of frustrated about. I think just the way that they have so many dynamic options. They had 4 different runners average more than 12 yards per carry in this game, including Dante, who has, I think, the longest run of his career, 35 yards, and kind of on just a scramble that he's able to get upfield and kind of weave through some players. There's also, he had a long run that may have been close to a score. I know Sadiq got called for a hold on this, so it came back anyway. But that was another cool kind of scheme play in terms of basically getting your quarterback out there on kind of a lead play, and you've got 3 or 4 offensive linemen out in front, downfield, taking care of business. So yeah, no, of course, on a day where you have like 750 yards of offense and you hang 56 on somebody, there's a lot to talk about on this side of the ball. But I think the run game in Will Stein deserved to be kind of talked about with quite a bit of appreciation, because it was really impressive, and they certainly didn't waver at all in their desire to establish the run game. And in the second half, they stuck with it and had, again, the majority of their yardage there after intermission.
I gotta say, when I look at this box score, as much as all the numbers pop out on offense, my eyes keep going to 8 for 27 for 79 yards.
Yeah.
Rutgers passing attack. And,
yeah.
I mean, getting ready for this week, it just seemed like that was the one thing that made me a little nervous. It seemed like the Scarlet Knights were going to be able to toss it around a little bit. And I mean, they completed at least 60% of their passes all season long, only less than 30% today. So that one just continues to shock me each time my eyes glance over that.
Yeah, and you kind of look at that, right? So that's what 19 incompletions. Oregon had pass breakups on 8 of those, and those are just what's credited here. We'll see what PFF does. I don't want to say a better job, but sometimes they end up turning up a few more than what you see in these counting stats. A lot of this happened at the line of scrimmage. One of the interceptions was swatted down by Amari Washington's face mask. Maybe he should look into playing on the soccer team. A little bit of a header there that leads to an interception. Several plays downfield broken up in impressive fashion. The coverage with, I mean, I guess another thing just on that needs to be talked about is Brandon Finney, again, outstanding. Would love to see the PFF data in terms of catches he gave up. I know Dan Lanning in his post game, didn't he say something like, I don't think he gave up a catch? And I'll be honest, I think I agree with him. Like I'm sitting here kind of going through the game, and of course, it's only 8 receptions to kind of parse through, but I can't think of one that was his fault. And then it's the other side. It's the cornerback too was the other question mark. One of the big question marks I had coming in was, we feel really good about this true freshman, but the redshirt freshman and Ife Obadegu had been kind of up and down, had some bad moments last week. Theron Johnson had some really tough moments against Elijah Surratt early on in that game. Sione Lalea, I thought, was fine in that game, but it was kind of unclear who the cornerback 2 was, and I thought all 3 of those guys played really well. And it's notable that, again, like the very first snap of the game for Rutgers, they try to go at Obadegu and he knocks the ball away. So, it's just like we gave credit, I think, fairly to Indiana on a day where Oregon's offense wasn't very good last week. Rutgers' really atrocious offensive passing day is absolutely a byproduct of Oregon's defense. And here's another stat: is Washington gave up 386 yards passing to this team that Oregon just gave up 79 yards against. And those listening will appreciate that. Any way to kind of poo-poo the Huskies, the rival up north, especially on the day where Washington didn't look very good either in a loss. So, the defense, I think that stands out. And I guess just one other thing, how about all the turnovers they forced? That's been something that they've kind of at times struggled with. Come away in this game, I think both teams ended up with 3 turnovers, but they end up forcing 3. Aaron Flowers deserves at least a mention here. He forces 2 of them, one with his, kind of chin strap on the football, ball pops out there and Johnson jumps on that, and the other with the interception on a play that I think it was a pressure from Tatum Tuioti that forced it. But gosh, you have to feel really good about just the totality of the defensive performance. And certainly you have to feel good about the fact that, like, the areas that Indiana really kind of took advantage of, or, at least throwing the football, you feel like you have some answers of, like, it's not broken. There's a lot of opportunities here. We'll see going up against certainly like USC later in the season here in terms of like a prolific, aggressive, productive pass offense. But it feels like Oregon has way more answers than maybe people wanted to give them credit for entering.
Want to get into the nitpicking portion of the podcast, and
because it is a win here. Let's start with the I did it both ways, Jackson. So I went over to Twitter, formerly X, formerly Twitter, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say, and asked, okay, like, tell me some things that impressed you most. So I'm going to read through a little of the impressed here, and we can react to that, and then we'll do the nitpicks, which not surprisingly, but there are about twice as many comments, a little more in the nitpick section than in the impressed section, which is always funny coming off a win like this. But I'm going to do these kind of rapid fire here, Jackson, then we can kind of give some reactions. Cross country bounce back with authority. Playmakers made plays. Offensive game plan was stellar. Ran the ball downhill like we should have last week. Aggressive, physical, easy to see last week, woke them up. Blake Purchase all over the place. Mentioned him with the interception. That's another good one here. He had one of his better days. Certainly felt like he kind of popped a little bit. This was one that I noticed in game that I'm kind of curious to see if we see this continuing. Switching Janoris Wilson to right tackle and Alex Harkey to right guard seemed to work and had the most open holes by a large margin. Hope they continued with that going forward. Zachary was the one who put that out there. I'm with you, Zach. That's a notable one. I know that was the thought that somebody posited. I forget. I saw somebody share that with me this week, and I thought that kind of makes a little sense because I think Harkey ultimately is probably more right guard than right tackle. The O-line is powerful. That Will Stein can't handle the pressure of bigger games. I don't know why that's in the positive section, but okay. I guess because this went so well last week's show that's what that was about. I guess assuming what the logic is there. Throwing the ball downfield. What was the total again, Jackson, of pass plays over 20 yards? Do you remember?
It was 13.
It's like it's just they threw the ball down the field over and over to feed the studs has become kind of a mantra from Will Stein. Those guys went home with full bellies, I think. The the energy in the first half and what could have easily been a letdown game after last week's loss. Yeah, absolutely. And then one here, just simply Dante. And yeah, absolutely. That's for me, probably, I know I've already said it. That's for me the big one, because he's a young quarterback. Things kind of went sideways and snowballed when he lost a couple of games at UCLA as a quarterback. I know as a true freshman season, this is his redshirt sophomore year, so a couple of years between, but you just don't know necessarily. Like we all know physically, there's so many tools that are impressive, but sometimes they're kind of, people don't always have the resiliency. I didn't necessarily question that, but it could have been a case where we came out of this going like, oh boy, Oregon has a quarterback issue. We certainly aren't feeling that way at all. And on a weekend where like Heisman Trophy betting favorite Carson Beck throws 4 interceptions and a couple other guys falter, Dante's Heisman odds probably go up. I know other players like Fernando Mendoza had a really impressive game. So I'm not saying he's the favorite by any means again, but definitely not a day where he hurt his stock in that regard. Anything that I threw out there, Jackson, kind of popped to you?
Well, when you said cross-country road win with authority, one thing that just pops out to me is all the green that was in that crowd. That was impressive. I didn't expect to see. Well, obviously, Oregon's never been there before, so no one knew for sure. But just you saw some of those pans from the Oregon side of the stadium, and it just seemed like it was like 80% Oregon fans. So I was really impressed by that. I mean, that was outside of obviously all the big stuff we covered on offense. That was just something that caught my eye. And you never know, a sold out stadium, maybe having that much green helped Oregon shake off that first drive a little faster.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from people in the comment section who were at this game. Like, what's your estimate on how many Duck fans turned out? I know, I know I've got several friends and family that are friends and people that went out to this that said that there was a huge Duck contingent. Like Jackson said, you saw it on TV, but I'd love to hear people kind of weigh in and talk about it. It seemed like at the end of the game, and this isn't a surprise necessarily, but Oregon probably had like a 10-1 fan advantage because I don't think there was a lot of red in that stadium by the time you got to the fourth quarter. All right. Nitpick time. Of course, got about, like I said, about twice as many of these than the positives, but that's just football on the internet these days. Playing Brock Thomas instead of the other scholarship quarterbacks. If Dante gets hurt, we're trusting the offense to a walk-on from Sheldon. I don't really have a great explanation for you other than Autzen Audibles, who was the presumed backup, was not on the availability report. He had been in previous games, but he hasn't really been, I think, since Northwestern. I think for Oregon State, Penn State, Indiana now it's like a full month or more of he's not listed there. Luke Moga was the quarterback who appeared first against Oklahoma State. Brock Thomas was the first who appeared against Oregon State, and now this week against Rutgers. I don't have a great explanation. I've seen people suggest, like, is it redshirt related? It can't be because both Moga and Novosad have used redshirt years. Is it possible Novosad's not popping up on the availability report, but is still dealing with a lingering injury, not available? I think that's possible. I think the other outcome that people don't really want to acknowledge because he is a walk-on and whatnot is that Brock Thomas has beat these guys out, or at least is playing better than these guys in practice. And because of that is getting the run in these games, which I guess like the one thing that was sort of confounding is the fact that he got all the run, not just that he was the quarterback to enter first for Dante, but the fact that he took every snap with the second team offense. So this is something that'll be asked of Dan going forward. But I will say one thing on the Brock Thomas front. I think it came from, I don't want to misattribute it, but somebody on the 24/7 recruiting team. And I guess Jackson, you know, some of those people, maybe you heard about this or maybe you didn't, because it's kind of a niche player. He's a local high school kid who ended up being a walk-on at Oregon. But I know there are people who are saying Brock as a high school prospect, you know, he had offers from Portland State and several FCS schools decided to stay home. I think he has family that had played at the university. That if he was, and he's like 5'10", listed on the roster, he's probably a little shorter than that. But that, like, if he was 6'4", this was a guy who would have been maybe like a 4-star who had a lot of national attention. But the fact that he's so undersized and was obviously not a positive. So maybe it's the case that, like, yeah, this guy's got some tools to look good on a couple of those throws downfield, and we know he can run. You know, other than Moga, I think he's probably their fastest quarterback. So I'm not trying to build the case of like he's definitely the number 2 based purely on merit necessarily. I'm just trying to offer some explanations because I know this was one of the ones that we're going to see pop up here over and over again in this section here. Field goal kicking and linebackers constantly getting knocked back in the run game. Special teams, Jackson. You're newish to Oregon, so you probably haven't felt this quite as much as people listening, or certainly myself. But Oregon's just historically not been good at kicking field goals, and I don't know if they fully made a switch in this game, but they went to the freshman instead of the senior, and he also missed a 44-yard kick, so that was not thrilling or ideal for anybody. That's 4 missed field goals in 7 games this year. Kind of a concern. In person, they looked solid apart from up the middle. Seemed to give up a few extra yards between the tackles. Backup defense played really well despite giving up the late touchdown. I'm happy that this particular person, I'll share Jared, with a little bit of a positive spin at the end of the nitpick section. Good to see a little bit of that here. I don't like when Dan subs out. I don't like when Dan subs out and our third string gives up a score. So infuriating. Not always great to give up touchdowns late in games. Bryce and Mateo were amazing, but once we start recruiting some elite linebackers, our defense will be so scary. There's definitely a lot of linebacker-related content here. We can beat up on little small teams. Not impressed. So that's somebody who didn't come away all that pleased with today. Apparently, it's just this is what they should do. Which, hey, maybe there's an argument that you can say that and have with a straight face and mean it. We may need to give a scholarship to a game day Home Depot kicker. That's pretty good. Yeah, that becomes a problem. And penalties. Someone wrote here. Jackson, what was the penalty data? Did they have that many? I guess they had the one that wiped out. They had a couple that wiped out big games.
4 for 50.
Yeah, they just felt like big ones, I guess.
The ones they got were big ones, yeah, yardage wise at least.
Yeah. Okay. That's basically it. I ran through. There was a lot of why is Brock Thomas playing? The kicking game is a concern, and linebackers aren't very good. Those seem to be the three lines. Any of those, I already addressed the Brock Thomas thing, so I don't expect you to hit that. But any of that really popped for you watching this, or any thoughts there?
I just keep having 2 plays flash in my mind where Rutgers took some deep shots down the side, 1-on-1, and if they were thrown with a little more touch and a little more on stride, they probably would have been touchdowns. So maybe a team with more of a pulse would have had 14 extra points in this one. Otherwise, I've been scratching my head a little bit about the quarterback deal, trying to figure that one out on the fly here myself as well. And I got to say, to plug in my live tracking of the recruits last night for the VIPs on the board, it was a game. Cam Pritchett, 2027 edge commit, had a sack. It looked like he was sending their game into overtime. And Hoover High School's James Bryant hit a 55-game winner at the buzzer. So maybe that's the guy that Oregon needs to go run after right now to get ready for next year.
Somebody needs to be. This was actually, we talked about this briefly on our Monday mailbag with Zach Neal from Duckswire, but it does feel like field goal kicking, and this was prior to tonight, obviously, where they miss another one from a different kicker. It does feel like plays kicking recruiting needs to get better, or needs to be better coached, or something needs to change. It is also, when you beat a team by 46 points, that one of the primary things is that hey, we missed a kick, and that's bad. Here's another nitpick that I think we briefly mentioned. DeCorian Moore had a really good game, but that muffed punt was pretty significant. If we're talking about the possibility of going out and breaking that school record, I think with another possession there, that might happen. And Rutgers, I don't think, is going to score a touchdown if not for that. Like, they had their longest drive of the game was 47 yards. They were able to punch that in because they got the ball, I think, at the 30-yard line after DeCorian muffed it. So that's the 2 of their turnovers were by receivers who are known to be really sure-handed. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, and it's kind of like, who cares? And DeCorian is the backup punt returner to Gary Bryant for a reason. But that was kind of a not so great thing, just to kind of throw another in there for we're getting things off our chest, which is the kind of the point of the segment. I don't know if I have a whole lot more, Jackson. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? If you have a couple of things, maybe I'll think of something. But I feel like maybe we're at kind of a stopping point here.
Yeah, that was about it on my end. But I mean, hard. I'm surprised we have as many on the list after a final score like this. I know.
Yeah. Well, what about anything really positive that we didn't touch? Anything? Any other thoughts? I guess.
Again, I think we got a lot of it in there.
Okay.
Yeah, just a whole lot of unusual numbers from the offense, which has been a lot of fun to parse through here.
Next up for Oregon is Wisconsin at home. A Wisconsin team that comes in losing 4 straight, shutout last 2 games, lost to Iowa 37-0, lost to Ohio State 34-0. I bring this up because we're going to do a whole week of podcast talking Wisconsin. But I did predict in the preseason, one of my Skopil Damuses was that the defense would have a home shutout, which is like its first since I want to say 2012. This is the week where it might happen. This is a team that's been shut out 2 consecutive weeks. That means they haven't scored a touchdown in at least 8 quarters. Oregon's defense is, I won't say it necessarily as good as Ohio State's because I think that's an elite defense, but this Iowa defense just gave up 28 points to this Rutgers team and like almost 400 yards. There's no reason Oregon can't maybe do something as well here against a Wisconsin team that maybe they're the one that finally, this could be coach 4 that gets fired shortly after coaching against Oregon because Luke Fickell is, I would say, shockingly on the hot seat despite being somebody that had a lot of momentum as a head coach from his time at Cincinnati. It just hasn't worked out in Madison. So we'll do a lot of coverage this upcoming week on this matchup with the Badgers. After that's a bye week. The schedule sets up very nicely. And I guess one last thing, Ducks could move up a little bit in the polls. Kind of a crazy, hectic week in college football. Not only did number 2 Miami go down on Friday, but we also saw today Ole Miss loses to Alabama. Texas Tech gets upset. There might have been another I'm just not thinking of, but there's room for Oregon to maybe climb the ladder up here and move back up to the top 5 or at least close to it. So could be a really positive weekend. We'll have all the findings from that over at DuckTerritory.com. But until the next podcast, this has been Erik Skopil and Jackson Moore. Talk to you later, folks.